Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree, and I know this isn't my horror channel, but I wanted to talk about the Scream movie from 1996. I just rewatched it again for I don't know how many times I've seen this movie, and I noticed a few things that I want to nitpick, because I've seen it enough times now. Even though I love this movie, I can nitpick it. So, I'm going to start off with the whole sheriff's department, police department bullshit. I was a journalist for 7 years. I worked at a lot of different newspapers, magazines, TV stations, a lot of them, radio stations, everything. I did it all for 7 years. I studied journalism in college, and not just studied it. I mean, I read books on it. I watched movies on it, documentaries on it. I have friends who are journalists. I have friends who I cannot and will not identify here, who are famous journalists, and I'm not going to name drop because it's none of your business. But I am going to say, and I was pretty well respected in my field when I was a journalist, but I'm not going to say what my name was because that was dead name, and I don't put that out there. But here's what I will say. I was a crime reporter, and I covered a lot of crime scenes and investigations, police investigations. I covered a lot of court cases. I did my research. And Scream isn't the only one that gets this wrong, so by no means am I just poking a hole in Scream and saying, Scream does this wrong. Every horror movie gets this wrong. Scream gets a double whammy, though, and I'm going to explain why. In the hierarchy of police jurisdiction, there are 4 levels of jurisdiction in the United States of America, which this movie takes place in California. So, jurisdiction number 1, your local city cops. This is your chief of police and their officers. And it is chief of police, who is hired by the city council and appointed by the mayor, and police officers who are hired by the chief. This is your city police. Every town in America has city police, presumably. I mean, at least one cop. The next level is your county police. These are the ones who go outside city limits. The city police are local. They do not have jurisdiction outside city limits. So if you live in a farmhouse out in the country, the city cops have no jurisdiction out there. This is where it turns over to the county police, which are known as the sheriff's department. A sheriff is an elected official who is picked by the voters, and then the sheriff hires deputies. Now, here's the thing about sheriffs. They have the legal authority to put a badge on anybody at any point in time and make them a deputy. They don't have to pay them or nothing. They can literally say, I need a posse, and hand out badges to everybody in the posse and say, as of right now, you're all deputies. That is legal in the United States. They can do that. And in some places, they still do that regularly because they don't have the manpower, especially when there's like a kidnapping or a serial killer. We'll talk about in just a second. The third layer to police jurisdiction is state police. This is your highway patrol. They have jurisdiction on state roads, mostly highways and interstates. It gets a little messy when you're talking about interstates because you have interstate commerce. That's handled by the FBI, but that's another story for another day. We'll brush that aside for a second. And then you have the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is the police department of the United States of America, the federal government's police arm. In a crime, a murder that takes place in city limits, the chief of police and the officers, and they're called officers, police officers, would have jurisdiction in city limits, not the sheriff. Sheriff is hands off. Can't touch it. Can't even investigate. They have no legal jurisdiction. They can't even get information on the case. They are just shut out. They're just, as far as the law is concerned, the sheriff is a civilian. They don't have access to that information. Unless there is some tie outside of the county, and then there can be inter-office cooperation. Scream identifies the chief police officer, the head guy, the main cop, as the sheriff. It literally calls him Sheriff whatever his name is. Dewey identifies himself as Deputy Dewey, not Officer Dewey, Deputy Dewey, which means he's a deputy of the sheriff's department, not the police department. So, the first murder that takes place, Casey Beckham and her boyfriend Steve take place in a farmhouse out in the country. That is jurisdiction of the sheriff's department. The sheriff's office would have jurisdiction on that. Easy peasy. We're good so far. Yeah, the sheriff's office would have jurisdiction there. Except we see the chief of police, I'm saying chief of police. We see the sheriff, and I'm using quotes here, go into the quote Woodsboro Police Department, and I paused and freeze framed, and it says Woodsboro Police Department. And on the side of his cruiser, his police cruiser, it says Woodsboro Police. It does not say Woodsboro County Sheriff, which is whatever county Woodsboro takes place in. Let's just say for the Orange County. Let's just say it takes place in Orange County. He would be the chief, or he would be the sheriff of Orange County Sheriff's Department, not Woodsboro Police. The head of the Woodsboro Police Department would be the chief of police hired by the city council. The sheriff's department would not have any jurisdiction in town, so the sheriff and his deputies would not have the authority to go into the high school on city property in city limits and conduct an investigation. They don't have that authority. They would have to, through inter-office cooperation, contact the local police, the city police, and say, we need you to go in and investigate, and then give us the information. If you catch a suspect, you transfer that suspect to us, and we process him. That's how that works. But the other murders take place in city limits. Tatum, that's in city limits. Kenny, that's in city... Well, Kenny might be in the country. I guess Tatum would be in the country as well. But the principal Wembley is killed in city limits. He's killed in the high school. So the sheriff's office would have no jurisdiction in that murder investigation at all whatsoever. So for Dewey to be Sheriff Deputy Dewey to be investigating on city grounds, in city limits, on city government property, which is what the high school is, well, sort of. It's complicated because there's school districts, but that's another story for another day. He would have no authority. He would have no legal authority to be there. In fact, the school wouldn't allow him in. They would tell him no, call the local police. They can come in, and then they will do their investigation. So in Scream, you have a sheriff's department calling themselves the sheriff's department, but their cars all say Woodsboro Police, which is a big fuck up, a major fuck up. Okay. However, none of that matters. None of that matters. Because in matters of a serial killer, no local police has jurisdiction. When there's a serial killer, the FBI takes over. Now it's an FBI case. So the local cops have to take all their evidence and hand it to the FBI whenever there's a serial killer. And by all definitions of a serial killer, Ghostface in Scream is a serial killer. So the local police, by law, would have had to contact the local FBI office and invited them into town to do the investigation. And then the FBI would conduct the investigation. And all the local cops, the sheriffs, everybody else would be hands off. Now, we do know, this is where it gets a little tricky. We do know that Stumacher's house is outside city limits. It's in the country. But I'm going to Google real quick. What was Stumacher's address in Scream? $3871 Tamales Petaluma Road. Okay. Tamales Petaluma Road. So, it's not clear if that's a county road or a state road. If it was a state road, it would be State Highway X, State Highway 6 or whatever, or Interstate 7 or whatever, presumably. So, we can rule out the Highway Patrol having jurisdiction, obviously, and we can rule out the city police having jurisdiction because it's outside of city limits. So they wouldn't even have jurisdiction anyways. But because it's a serial killer, it would be the FBI. So this is a big plot hole, right? Smack dab in the middle of this movie. All right, let's push that aside for a second. we've punched holes in that. Let's push that aside for a second. Billy Loomis and Stu Macher are the killers in this movie. And now it's difficult to tell which is doing which killings, but we can deduce at least two killings that we can deduce. We know almost absolutely for a fact it had to be Stu who killed Kenny, because Billy was still upstairs faking his injury, because he comes downstairs just a few moments later and attacks Sidney. So we know Stu is the one who killed Kenny. We can say that with 95% certainty. I'm fairly certain, I'm about 85 to 90% certain Billy Loomis is the one who kills Tatum. And the reason why I believe that is because we see Tatum dies, and then the killer goes inside. And then we turn around and we see Stu is standing there talking to Sidney. The killer did not have time to take his costume off in front of everybody. And in front of everybody, a crowded house in front of everybody, and magically appear in front of Sidney. He didn't have time to do that. There just wasn't, you can count the seconds, there was not enough time. But Billy comes in the front door a few seconds later, and he's gassed. He's out of breath. So we can likely deduce Billy was Tatum's killer. Okay, so far there's no hole. However, there kind of is a hole. Because if Stu was Tatum's killer, why did he kill his own girlfriend when he was seen being fairly affectionate towards her throughout the movie? Treating her well, for the most part. He was a little bit of a dick, but for the most part, he was affectionate to his girlfriend, and she was affectionate towards him. If Billy killed Tatum, we have to ask two questions. Question number one, did Stu know Billy was going to kill Tatum? Question number two, was Stu okay with it? Was he on board with it? Or was this one of those fuck-ups? Did Billy go off script? So we don't know. So that's kind of sort of a hole. Forget all that shit I said about police. Here's where I really nitpick as a journalist. Gale Weathers is a TV show host. They make that clear. Multiple times. They say, Gale, I watch your show. Or she says to Dewey, my show is popular in the 14 to 24 demographic. My show. My show. If she was a news reporter, they wouldn't be saying your show. They would have said, I like you on the 6 o'clock news. Or, I think you're a great reporter, etc. Or she wouldn't have said my show. She would have said, when I'm on the news. You know, whatever. She would have said, my stories. As a journalist, she would have said, my stories do well during this demographic or whatever. She wouldn't have said my show. And we know from subsequent Scream movies that she was a TV show host. Now, we don't know what type of show she hosted. Presumably, based on her mannerisms and her language and the things that people say about her, we can deduce that she's likely a tabloid reporter, which means she probably works for a show like Entertainment Tonight or Hard Copy or one of those kind of sleazy kind of shows. You know, one of those kind of shows. However, when you're the host of the show, when you're the anchor, whether you're the anchor of the 6 o'clock news, or you're the host of Entertainment Tonight, or you're the host of, I don't know, you're Bill O'Reilly and you're the host of whatever his show was called, I don't know, I never watched it. You do not go out in the field and cover a beat story. You don't do it. You don't. Gale Weathers is not a beat reporter. This is a crime story. This is a beat reporter story. This would be an intern or a new hire. This would be somebody with no experience covering this beat, because that's who they give the crime beat to. They always give the crime beat to an inexperienced reporter. Why? To get your feet wet, to cut your teeth. You're going to do a lot of hard journalism as a crime reporter. You're going to do more hard journalism as a crime reporter than you are covering City Hall, but they're not going to let you cover City Hall until you're ready. City Hall is a big damn deal. There's a lot of nuance to politics, and you have to be very careful because as a journalist, you have to be unfair. You have to be unbiased. You have to be fair and balanced. Presumably, as a journalist, not as a commentator, but we're going to push that aside for a second. So, if Gail Weathers was a host of a TV show, now we can assume she wasn't the host of the 6 o'clock news. We can assume she was probably the host of a local TV station's version of Hard Copy, or a talk show of some sort. I worked at TV stations that had those local shows. She would have sent her beat reporter out in the field. Now, I have to point out, there are cases where you will see the host in the field. It does occasionally happen. But those cases are, one, extremely rare. So put a pin in that, because we will come back to it. And two, usually when that happens, like, I would say 85% of the time when that happens, maybe 90% of the time when that happens, the whole show is in the field. It's a live show. They're doing the show from the Christmas parade. They're doing the show from the county fair. They're live on location. The whole show is live on location. That's when you're going to see the anchor in the field. That's when you're going to see the anchor in the field. Even though this is a high-profile murder case because of its ties to Cotton Leary and the previous murder, etc., and there's a lot of news reporters buzzing around town, that TV news director sitting in the office where Gail works would flat out tell Gail, no, you are not covering this story. This is not your beat. This is not bullshit. This ain't your beat. You are not covering this. I'm not going to endanger your life and send you out in the field. I'm going to endanger the life of the inexperienced intern because that's what we do. I'm going to send them in the field, and if they get hurt, oh well, we get another intern. You're too valuable to us as a TV station. I know that sounds cold, but listen, I've worked in the TV business long enough to tell you it's a fucking cold business. It is the business where they will tell you your tits aren't big enough, you can't be on TV. Your hairline's receding, you can't be on TV. Your nose is too fat, you can't be on TV. It is a cold fucking business. It literally is. I have friends who are news reporters who were told they were too fat to be on TV. And they had to go work somewhere else to get a job. They had to go work at a newspaper. Or they had to go do sports because sports is less picky because they don't care as much. Or, they had to do, whatever. They had to settle for whatever they could get. I know people who had to do that because they were literally told, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're too tall, whatever. I have friends who I was told this. I'm not going to tell you what I was told. It's none of your motherfucking business. But I was not allowed. I was a news reporter for 7 years. I was a television producer. I was a video editor. I was a camera operator. I had a name in my community. I was well recognized, well respected. People knew who I was. And I was told, X, you can't be on our TV station because of X. And I'm not going to get into what X is. But I was told that. So TV is cold as shit. And yes, I was there. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. I was working as a news producer. And on the 10 p.m. Sunday, 10 p.m. Saturday newscast. I did the weekend. I was the weekend producer for a while before I was the weekend producer for a while, but I was also producer of the Fox station for a while, but I went back and forth. When I was the weekend producer, I did the 5 o'clock, the 6 o'clock, and the 10 o'clock on Saturday nights and Sunday nights. If there was football, we didn't have a 5 o'clock and a 6 o'clock show. We just showed football instead. We always had a 10 o'clock show because football was always done before 10 o'clock. One night, I was working, and this is a true story. I was working, and I was typing away, and I had nothing. I was literally, me and my anchor were sitting here twiddling our thumbs, like, what are we going to make, literally, what are we going to make our top story? We have nothing to be top story. We're sitting here like, well, do we want this to be top story? Do we want this to be top story? Do we want to say fuck it and pull a national story, something COVID related, because this was back during COVID? And we got a phone call. Well, no. Before we got the phone call, let me back it up. We got a text message on Facebook. We got a private message on Facebook. And in the private message, we got a cell phone clip. And the cell phone clip showed, yellow tape and a police car and a police officer at a gas station. And in the message, it said, white cop shot black man at this gas station. That's not enough to go on. But so I tell my reporter, on my anchor, we need to investigate. So she calls the police department because she's like, hey, I want some information. And they hung up on her. The police department never hangs up on a news reporter. They don't do it. That's bad protocol, and it will go in the news story, and it did go in the news story. It was in our story. We called the police, and they hung up on us. That was in the story, and cops know better. They know better not to fuck with the news reporters. They're not stupid. This is stupid. Why? Because a white cop shot an innocent black man. And we did investigate. I came to work the next day. So we made this our top story. We got some phone calls, and we made some phone calls, and we got just enough to say that police found a body at this gas station at this time, and it was a black man shot by a white cop. We had just enough to confirm that, but nothing else. And we ran with it and made it our top story. Breaking news. We literally put the breaking news headline and everything. I come to work the next day, and I open my inbox, and I have hundreds of emails from TV stations all over the country. Fox News, CNN, everybody wanted our video. Everybody wanted any information we had. Because this was right after, literally the summer of George Floyd. This was the same summer George Floyd happened. This was like maybe a month, maybe 2 months after George Floyd happened. And there were already protests outside that police station and that convenience store. Later, we found out through investigating that man who was murdered worked at the police department, was not a suspect in any crime, and was literally murdered by a white cop for presumably no reason. We never did get a motive. Here's the thing. This was a national story. CNN was there. Fox News was there. MSNBC was there. Everybody was there. Every TV station within 200 miles was there. So this would be the equivalent of the Woodsboro murders. Okay? A big enough story that you literally, I don't care where you are, you have to be there. This is the story to cover. And we had this discussion. Our anchor had been a beat reporter. She had been a crime reporter. That was her beat when she started out. And our anchor wanted to take a news crew and go there and do the show live on location. We said no. We said no for two reasons. One, you're too valuable to the company. We can't endanger your life. And we can't guarantee that you'll be safe because there are protests. And when we say protests, we mean violent protests. Some would say riots, but we're not going to get into that right now. And two, it's technically outside of our coverage area. The only reason why we covered it in the first place is because we literally had nothing for our top story that night, and we were just grasping for straws. We were literally just like, thank God we got a murder. Not to be crass or cold or anything, but that's how the news works. We were literally like, whew, now we got a show. And we rewrote our whole show around that news story. So obviously the next day we had to send a crew. We have to. CNN's going to be there. Fox News is there. Everybody's there. We have no choice. Gun to our head, back against the wall. We have to send a crew. But we do not send our anchor. Her job is to sit at the desk and read you the news. Her job is not to go out in the field and report the news. We have news reporters for that job. So who do we send? The young girl who only had 2 weeks experience. Because she's expendable. She has no experience. She's expendable. Send her. Literally, I'm not making this up. I didn't make this decision. The news director made this decision, and that was his logic. That was literally what he said. She's expendable. Send her. He didn't say expendable, but he said, we can send her. That's her beat. That's her job. And he turned to the anchor and said, you're too valuable. We can't send you. We can't risk you. So he's saying, we can't send you because we can't guarantee we'll keep you safe. We can send her because that's her job. We couldn't guarantee that we were going to keep her safe either, but we did send a whole crew. We sent a van. We sent a producer. This is not protocol. Protocol is you send the reporter and you maybe send a camera operator, a photog. So you send the MMJ and the photog. That's protocol. We broke protocol, and we sent a producer with our team, and we sent one of our sports guys, because he's a big dude, for added security. So we would have the reporter, and then one person on her left, one person on her right, and one person behind her, so she would be safe. That's what you do in this dangerous situation. They didn't do that in Scream. So presumably, hypothetically, you have a news anchor in a dangerous setting covering a dangerous field report when that's not her job. And I'm calling bullshit on that. That would not fucking happen. That would never happen. That would literally never happen. Now, we did later in the week when the protests turned violent, and I'm talking they were burning that gas station down, and they were tipping over police vans, and they had to call in the National Guard, because that did happen. When that happened, we did send the anchor, but we also sent the producer, and we sent the satellite van, which we never send the satellite van unless we're going to do a live show, and we did the whole show live in the field, which is the only time you send the anchor in the field. And we had the anchor surrounded by all those added security, sitting around, with a camera operator in front of her, and a sound person over here doing sound, and somebody sitting in the van making sure the feed was getting back to the station, and a whole crew of like 7 people, and of course a producer there on location, feeding us and talking into our headsets so we could get everything on air. But we did the show live on location because at that point we had to. At that point we had no choice. It was literally, this is a national story. This is a lot bigger. And by the way, they did eventually convict that police officer, which is rare, but they did. They fired him, they convicted him and everything. So, we did our part and we got justice. That's what you do. Which is what Gail does in this movie. She literally plays her part to get justice for the killer and exonerates an innocent man who was wrongfully accused and convicted. So that is good journalism. Gail was a good journalist, but that wasn't her job. That wasn't her beat. She wasn't a crime reporter. She had no business being in the field covering a crime story. And she would not have been in the field covering a crime story if she was a host of a TV show or an anchor. She wouldn't have. There's no way they're going to send the top talent into the field live in a dangerous situation with a killer on the loose. A masked, unidentified killer on the loose. They're not going to do that. Never in a million years are they going to do that. They don't do that in the TV business. All right. Okay, so that's 3 major holes that I want to punch into this movie. Even though I love this movie, I had to break this apart a little bit. You can sweep some of this under the rug and chalk it up to it's Hollywood. They either A, don't know any better, or B, they didn't do their homework, or they just don't give a shit, or you can use the Hollywood logic. This is how it works in Hollywood land. It don't work that way in the real world, but in Hollywood, this is how it works. So you can use that logic. You can bend the logic using either explanation. Either the writers didn't know any better, and presumably director, producer, everybody on board behind the scenes didn't know any better, or it's just logic. It's just Hollywood logic. Who cares? It's movie magic, It's movie magic. In this cinematic universe, in the Scream cinematic universe, yeah, a beat reporter or a news anchor would go out in the field. In the Scream cinematic user, yeah, the chief of police would be the sheriff. Because why not? Whatever. That's a little iffy for me. But I'm going to call bullshit on Stu being okay with Billy killing his girlfriend or Stu doing it himself. There's no... Stu's motive was flimsy to begin with, but if he's literally doing it because of peer pressure, he's not going to murder his girlfriend. He has no reason to. Especially when you consider Stu expected to survive. His expectation was to get away with it, which means he thought he was going to get away with it and presumably go back to Tatum, his girlfriend, and get all the loving she could give him. Presumably. But of course he doesn't survive. He dies at the end of the movie, presumably. And I say presumably because I'm not sold his death was definitive. I'm not sold he could come back. I would say, I'm still not sold his death was definitive. Because, Michael Myers came back and he had no reason to. Jason comes back every time, and until he became zombie Jason, he had no reason to come back to life. So at this point in the film franchise, Stu could still come back. They could, if they wanted to, introduce a supernatural element and have zombie Stu. I doubt it, but they could if they wanted to. If they wanted to. I don't think they will, though. I'm pretty sure they won't. I just wanted to put this stuff out there because these are things that as I watch this movie, I find flaws with it, and I just want to point this out there to start a discussion. You can leave, do you work at a TV station? Is your experience in line with mine? Let me know. Maybe times have changed since COVID happened, because COVID did change the news, the way we do news. It changed everything, but it did change the way I was working in the news pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID. COVID changed the way we do news. So it's possible. But this was 1996. This is long, long, long before COVID. I didn't work in the news business in the 90s. I do know it was different in the 90s. You did have a full news crew in the 90s. You would presumably have a photog and a journalist and somebody in the van, a technician in the van, making sure everything went okay. Presumably. And we don't have that anymore because the technician that job has been eliminated, and the photog job has been eliminated. Now you just have what they call an MMJ, multimedia journalist, who goes out and does it all themselves. They have a little backpack with a transmitter on it, and they just shoot it back over satellite, or over radio waves, back to the TV station. So that's how it's done today. I don't know how it was done in 1996 because I was in high school in 1996. I definitely wasn't a news reporter back then. So it is plausible, I will say, plausible, that in the 90s, you may have had a different news philosophy at the time. I don't know. But I do know, at the TV stations I worked at, if we had been covering the Woodsboro murders, we would not send our anchor to Woodsboro. We would send a beat reporter. I can promise you that. We see Gail in subsequent films. Scream is iffy. There's no confirmation. There's no hard evidence that she's the anchor. So let's assume maybe she isn't the anchor. Maybe she just misspoke when she said my show because she's full of herself. I heard news reporters do that too. Journalists would. I did that when I would introduce people. I say, at my newspaper we do this. You're taking ownership of the newspaper you work at because it's your job. It's the establishment where you work. So let's sidestep and backtrack everything I just said and assume in Scream 1996 she was a beat reporter still. Hadn't made anchor yet. Okay, but she was anchor in Scream 2. She was a TV show host in Scream 4. She would not be sent out. At that point, she's a national name. There is no way a national TV station is going to send their news anchor, their bread and butter, out in the field in a dangerous situation with a masked, unidentified serial killer. So in the subsequent films, everything I just said applies, even if it might not apply to the original Scream. It still applies to the sequels. Even more so because she's even more famous and more valuable to the network as somebody who has a name for herself. So I'm going to call bullshit on the whole Gail Weathers was covering the story. They would not, her boss would not send her out there. Now, all right, let's throw a monkey wrench in this whole thing. It is possible, Hollywood logic, her boss didn't send her. She stole a van, hijacked a photog, and went out there rogue. That is a legit but remote possibility. I'm not saying I've ever seen that, because if you do that, you're absolutely fired the next day. No questions asked. You're just fired. It doesn't matter how valuable you are to the company. You stole company property. You're fired. There's no coming back from. There's no second chances. If you steal company property, there is no second chances. So she wouldn't be working for the same TV station in Scream 2 if that was the case. So I would have to go back to watch Scream 2 and pay close attention and see if the call signs on the van match the call signs on the van in the first movie to identify if it's the same TV station or not. Probably isn't, but if it is, then we can rule out her going rogue. We can rule that out, most likely. Now, let's talk about investigative journalist Gale Weathers. And this is the last thing I'm going to say before I end this video, because it's getting long. But I wanted this one to be long because there's a lot of depth. I wanted to get in depth. Gale Weathers, news reporter, investigative journalist, wrote a book based on a rumor, exonerating a convicted killer. She wrote a book with no evidence, just a rumor, exonerating a serial killer, or not serial killer, but a convicted killer, and hypothesizing there was another killer out there. An investigative journalist would not do that. They would not print anything without the facts. Now, she does identify herself as a tabloid journalist, which means she's not an investigative journalist. She's a tabloid journalist. What's the difference? Literally, tabloid journalists, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, can make up the news. Because anyone can make up the news. Your 6 o'clock anchor can literally sit there and make up the news if they want. They do not. News is news. News is whatever you say it is. Literally, the definition is news is whatever you say it is. There is no definition of news. So, no legal definition of news, I should say. So, by law, if the news anchor wants to just sit up there and literally talk about his wife's chili recipe, by law, he can do that, and that's still technically news. Would you watch that? Not likely. Would he have a job tomorrow? Most likely not. But he could do that if he wanted. If he wanted to, absolutely. Tabloid journalists can make up whatever they want. That is literally their job. That's what they do. That's the definition of a tabloid journalist. Tabloids make it up and then go on whatever they want. So as a tabloid journalist, I would buy Gale Weathers writing a book with no evidence based on rumor because, she's a tabloid journalist. She can speculate all day long. And as long as you say this is speculation, which she does, she mentions that. She doesn't say it's hard facts. She does say, well, this is a rumor. This is, I would love this to be true, and then she proves it. But until she proved it, it was speculation. You can do that too. You can speculate on the news if you want. You're allowed to do that. And journalists do that. Sometimes they do it in the form of a question. They will ask somebody, a chief of police or a political figure, a mayor or whoever, CEO of a company or whatever. They'll ask them the hypothetical that they want to ask themselves and let the source say the hypothetical back to them so that they can get it on record. Journalists do that all the time. I did that all the time. There were times where I wanted a quote, so I would ask the right question to get the quote I wanted. Because I knew that quote would sell newspapers. That's literally what journalists do. It's part of your job. Your job is to sell newspapers. When you're a TV news reporter, your job is to have people sit down at the dinner table and turn on the news and watch. That is your job. If nobody's watching the news, you're not doing your job. Now, one last monkey wrench. Suppose the TV show that Gale Weathers worked for was Hard Copy or Entertainment Tonight or whatever. This is a tabloid show, right? She's news anchor or host of a tabloid show. Let's go back to Geraldo. Geraldo is a tabloid reporter. His show is not news. His show is tabloid. Okay, the Geraldo, whatever his show was called. That's tabloid. That is not news. That's tabloid. He does, on occasion, go out in the field as a reporter. So as a tabloid reporter, it is plausible. I will say it is plausible if she's a host of a tabloid show, there is a possibility they would let her go into the field, except into a dangerous situation. They're not going to let her go into, right now, let's use as an example, Gaza. They they are not sending Anderson Cooper to Gaza. They're not going to do that. They're going to send some younger reporter who has less experience, who they don't mind losing. They can replace. They're not sending their host of the show to Gaza right now. They're not. They're not going to do that. They don't do that. Unless they're doing a whole live report from Gaza, which they may do on occasion, but, again, pay attention. They usually don't do that. Because it's too damn dangerous, by and large. Now, before he sat at the desk and hosted his own show, yeah, they would send him out all the time. That's how he got the job at the desk in the first place, is they sent him out and he did a damn good job doing his job. That's how you get at the desk, is by being a good beat reporter. If you're a lousy beat reporter, they're not going to sit you at the desk. They're going to keep you in the field forever. Or stick you in master control where no one will ever see your face again, which is what they did with me. Master control sucks. You do not want that job. It's a 12-hour shift where you're literally watching commercials all day long, checking boxes, and also doing 100 other things at the same time, watching 16 TV screens at the same time. You do not want to be a master control operator at all. And if anyone tells you you want to be a master control operator, they want you to take their job so they can go do something else. They're scamming you. They're conning. That's how I got it. I got conned. I was told, yes, we'll put you in master control for 3 months or whatever, and then we'll move you over to production and you can be a video editor. Yeah, that didn't happen. And I left that TV station. Because that didn't happen. Because when they stick you in master control, that's where you go. That's where your career goes to die. They put you in master control, they're basically saying, yeah, we don't want you anymore. Sucks, but it's true. I'm sorry to all of you master control operators out there who have shitty jobs. My heart goes out to you. But also thumbs up for doing it. Because, as you know and as I know, nothing would happen if master control wasn't doing their job. So kudos to you guys who do master control. But even the job sucks. And you got conned into it, most likely. Most likely. There are some people who that's what the job they want. I'm sure there are people who dreamt of being janitors all their lives. But most people who become a janitor didn't wake up and say, I think I want to be a janitor. It's the same with master control. Most people who end up in master control didn't want to be in master control. Well, that's a tangent for another day. Alright, that's all the holes I'm going to punch in Scream for now. If I watch it again and I notice other... Oh, no, I have one more. Okay, I do have one more. And this is why I wanted to make this video. So I apologize for putting this way at the end. Alright, I'm going to set the stage. Gail Weathers is flirting with Dewey. Gail Weathers says something to the effect of... Basically, she says, I'm real popular among boys 14 to 24. And Dewey says, I'm 25. And then she says, oh, I just missed you. Blah, 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 blah. They have their exchange. And she says, you don't look 25. You look 12 years old. And then she turns around and starts hitting on him. So she literally goes from, you look like a 12-year-old, to, in her next breath, I want to jump your bones. Is she admitting to being a pedophile? I'm not saying yes or no. I'm just asking the question. That seems a little iffy to me. You look 12 years old. I think you're hot. Let's go bone. That's a little fuzzy. That's no. That's a little fishy to me. Now, she doesn't literally say, you're hot, let's go bone, but she literally does say he's hot, and she is hitting on him at that point. After saying he looks 12 years old. So, I don't know, maybe you can chalk it up to an innocent comment, because she's like, you don't look 25, you look 12. She could have said 18. She could have said 19. Why 12? I don't know. The guy who directed Scream, Wes Craven, directed movies with child rape in them. And his most famous work outside of Scream is Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger, a child murderer who allegedly molested kids as well. And I say allegedly because it's hinted at throughout the films, but it's never confirmed until you get to the remake, which Wes Craven had nothing to do with. So, Yeah, I'm a little iffy on this one. I'm a little iffy on this one. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Was it an innocent comment, or was Gail admitting to being a pedophile? I mean, it's up to you. I'm not taking a side. I'm just asking the question because that's what a journalist does. I ask questions.